So we're super happy to have Mr. Drescher, our very special guest here tonight. He's been traveling the world, and we'll get to see some of his labor. And he's actually maybe going to land here in San Francisco eventually. So let's give him a warm welcome.
Well, I didn't hear any of that. Did you say? What did he say? Can we turn this down a little bit? I feel like I'm in like 1938, Nazi Germany. Is that possible to turn this down a wee bit? Hey, thanks for coming, and thanks to Brian Stauffer and Owen Smith for arranging this. My wife and I have just made a big trip all over the States, and this is sort of our end destination, and we're heading back to where we live in China. So this talk, it's not going to be very long, but what I would like to do is just sort of give you an idea of where we live and where we the place we work, basically. And I'd also like to invite my wife Wing up to show a little bit of her work as well, because we work in the same studio. Is there any way to turn this down a little bit, this light, or turn it off, maybe? Just screw it down. Thanks. All right, so I'm Danish born, and I lived in the States for many years, but about 1992 I left with my family. We moved far away to some exotic islands in Asia, and eventually I ended up in China, and I married Wu Yingyi, who's here tonight. And we moved to a place, we lived in Guangzhou for a while, which is a very big, dirty place. And after a while, we moved out to this place in Yunnan province, which is out west, near, sort of, if you can imagine Thailand, it's north of there. And it's sort of like the Rocky Mountains of China without cowboys. It's a very beautiful place, and we got to settle there and have lived there on and off for 12 years. Off time was spent mainly in Europe and in the States, but this is basically what we consider our home at this point. We're in the process of moving back to the States. So this town is sort of a very special place. It's situated between the mountains and a lake, which is very good feng shui, as the Chinese say. So it has a very sort of very special vibe, and the area is occupied by mainly what's called Bai people, the Bai minority, and in China the Yunnan is known as a place that of minorities. There are many minorities, and the Bai the Dali was actually a kingdom many years ago, like 1,000 years ago, and the people who are blue in this image are of Bai minority. The woman who is here, she's carrying tobacco. This is the Yi minority, and they're kind of fiercely independent minority, and they actually are, their culture is set up as a black Yi and a white Yi, and the black Yi keep the white Yi as slaves, or kept them as slaves, and they're amazing. They're very low on the totem pole in China. So the women usually end up carrying bricks and doing construction work. I think this is their party get-up. But usually they dress in very sort of bright, amazing polyester costumes. Before I left, the day before I left, I did a little 4-minute video to give you an idea of the town we live in, which I'd like to show you. This is very typical of a sort of Chinese rural town. Dali is very touristy. The south part of town is very, very touristy, and the north part of town is sort of normal merchants doing their thing. And this is imagery from the north part of China.
哇，过来那个脚。我去过来。
In China, they use lots of electric cars and motorcycles. This is the Communist Party headquarters.
Hello.
This is a woman, by the way.
Hello.
And this is the street that Wing and I bought a place, a little townhouse. This is the street that we live on. That's our house. So as you can see, it's sort of like a very relaxed place to be, and it's sort of filled with it's filled with kind of like lots of people from Beijing and Shanghai come there and live there, and as well as the local sort of minority population, and it's a very it's very inexpensive and very nice sort of pace for life. Wing and I, we have a house, and then we have a studio that's separate from the house, and this is my studio downstairs. I have sort of like the antechamber, kind of vomitorium. This is all my work, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. These are quite large. They're like 6 by 6 feet paintings that I'm doing. But Wing is upstairs. That's our dog at the bottom. what I'd like to do is I'd like to invite Wing up to show a little bit of her work so you get the feel for what we're up to. And Wing works upstairs in a studio. Wu Wing Yi is actually an alumni of CCA. She studied here a while ago, and she studied here and she studied at Columbia University. Wing?
Hi, good evening. Here I'm going to show you some of the project I'm still working on, and to have an idea of what I'm doing. And this is my studio upstairs of Henrik. Oops. And a very, very small space, but I have a queue at the back, so I can work on some ceramics. And I was in double major in CCA ceramics and illustration a long time ago. Very small space, but I work on the prototype in my studio. If for the development of the project, I would go to Jingdezhen or Canton to cast into stainless steel or into porcelain. This is our dog, Tofu. He's blind, he can't see, but very smart. And he worked downstairs and upstairs. And this is the project I'm working on. It's called Positive and Negative Space. And because we travel a lot and all over the world, so whenever I pass by Chinatown or visit friends from mainland, and I see objects and ceramics object we no longer found in mainland. So I start collecting those objects and end up into an installation piece. And at the beginning, I thought when I return to China, I can find those objects in a much cheaper price. But actually, the production line changed, so I no longer can see these kind of figures anymore. So I start collecting them and make cages to wrap them up. And end up, I have two presentations, one in Guangdong Museum of Art, and this one is in Toronto. And in a museum, in a gallery space. So I set it up. This is a solo exhibition, but I want to only present one piece, this one. So I set it up in the gallery and with cages, 108 pieces. So the audience walk in and can slowly study each one. And from a distance, you look at it as a Chinese ink painting. And this is another project I'm working on. It's called, I make the name, it's a sound sculpture. The whole idea is I make the shapes go with the body and become part of the sculpture with your body. But actually the shape, the object can work as an instrument. So have sounds comes out, can shake it or make it as an instrument. But when you hold the objects, we change the idea of like how you hold things and your body. And I also work with I start with the objects, like a very simple shape, like a bowl or cup, and then I work with found object to make it as an instrument. The whole idea is to change the perception of how musicians react with the traditional instrument, how they hold it and how they react with the sounds. And this one is the gold bowl is porcelain, and I work with a metalsmith to do the metal tree and can swing open, and two musicians can work together to play with it. And this project can, my goal is to end up with 5 to 7 pieces with a different musician holding it and react to the sounds, and on the stage become one piece of sculpture. And this is another piece. I start with the idea of red line. At the very beginning, I don't have an idea of what I'm going to do with that red line, but I just want to do something with the line, red color. So I make a tape and then just hang it on the wall, and then do drawing with it. This is a painting of the red line. And this red line is traced from an object, like objects around me that I feel very strong with. And I trace the contour and found a very beautiful line and do a drawing with it. And actually it seems like abstract, but actually it's figurative. And 2 years ago, I have a residency in Iceland. And before I came there, and I had the idea of, I'm not going to bring anything because I want to have the first impression of a place I've never been to. And I didn't bring with me any material and any idea. So I land there first, and I see all the stone are very powerful. And that next day I went to the hardware shop, and that was the place I found the material. But everything in Iceland is very expensive. And my whole idea of working on sculpture or working on ideas, we don't need to pay a lot of money to buy material to execute. So I end up pick up some wire and duct tape and make some red wire to sculpt along the stone stone embankment along the water. It's like the Chinese painting, the Chinese line painting, and draw the contour, link all the stone together, so the viewer walk close to the stone and can appreciate the contour of the stone instead of like if I'm a sculptor, and carve the stone and make another shape, because I see the stone already carved by the weather and the wind for so many years, the thousands of a year, already have a very beautiful shape. As a visual artist, all I need to do is to point out those beautiful lines for the audience. So this piece is pretty long, all the way to the light tower. That's it. Thank you. Back to Henrik.
So Wing and I work together, but sort of parallel. We don't work on projects together, but we do, residencies where we'll take on, tasks together. But pretty much our approach is very different, and we, somehow manage. My original inspiration when I was very young was to be an illustrator, because a friend of the family had been an illustrator in Denmark, and I approached it kind of in a very open way. I had no knowledge of illustration or graphic art, and I started making books and objects related to what I thought was illustration at that point. When I was about 18 years old, I came up. I had sort of like an idea that what I wanted to do was simply catalog the world, like everything at once was the thing that was kind of the mantra that I followed, and the way to contain these things was in book form. I was lucky enough that in high school we had a teacher who taught book arts, so I started working in the folded page and binding around the age of 16 or 17. These are books that I've kept, I guess, in the last 12 years or so. And they're actually the things that have informed my most recent project, which is this book called China Days, which is a book about my life in China. Books for me are like they're like movies, like mental movies. I take them very seriously. It's not. I don't work on. I don't really work in notebooks per se. I don't really do sketchbooks, but I do kind of works like focused works in books. I've never been a person who sketches that much. I'm more interested in the combined unity of pictures, and that's what mainly that's mainly what I've done in terms of my career. So I started working in notebooks, and I actually used these notebooks as portfolios. When I started working as an illustrator, I would approach art directors with finished, kind of bound books that were kind of very open-ended. Back then, I mean, and still, I suppose, I'm not sure, I guess now everything's online, but back then when you saw an art director, you'd bring a portfolio and you'd show them to them. And I kind of very early realized that that was not my path. And the sort of a shining moment in that was when for my 17th birthday, I got a very large portfolio as a gift, like one of these plastic things. And my brother told me, "Oh, great, now you look like a messenger." Because in New York, all the messengers carry these things. So I'm not going there. So I just made books with slowly with published works, but also things that I wanted to publish. And the idea slowly evolved as a kind of an idea of that you would meet with an art director and you would talk to them back when you could do that, which I'm not sure you can do anymore. And the books that you were presenting were presenting options for the art director, not just final work. So everything that I did, everything I showed was very, transient looking, ephemeral. And what it did was left me kind of without too many boundaries in terms of my work. So when I got jobs, I could also do very quick sketches and say something like this. And if the art director who hired me saw that my work had a very strong, personality, he would say, "Okay, something like that done by you, like that," and it worked like that. So these are sort of examples of the kind of thing that I would show, and I guess I would still show that. I mean, I don't, I haven't really changed that much. I have this other idea, which is that artists basically make one picture in their lives. They work on one idea, basically, from a as a picture idea. So I'm still doing what I'm doing now is very, very close to what I was doing when I was 17 years old. I don't really, maybe my skill is different, not better or worse, but it's just different. My approach may be different, but the essence of it is really informed by whatever was my first impression when I was quite young. So I was looking at lots of published work because I wasn't really, I've never been formally trained, so I was looking at lots of published. I would look at drawings in magazines, or I would look at pictures and books of Indian miniatures, for instance, or shop signs, things that were not really art per se, and that was a really formative thing for me. So these are sort of notebooks, and I was also very, I went to art school for like a semester, and then I graduated myself, and I went traveling. But the thing is that my skill level is not that high. I can draw, I can make a line that has that can emote something, but my skill level is not that high in terms of drawing. Owen Smith draws, can really draw. I can't do that, It's like I never learned that. So everything I do comes from it grows out of my weakness, And I've always accepted that as that's okay. This is your thing. This is what you do. I'm not, although I respect, classical drawing, and it's never been a thing that's really enticed me. I'm very kind of driven by my kind of fetishistic emotional attachment to pictures. So I mean, again, these are all notebook. They're just notebook. They're just images made to entice me to do other work, and as a PS to entice art directors, right? So this is like a long time ago, in the midst, in the late 70s, I guess. I would travel. I'd left school and I traveled quite a bit. I hitchhiked around the country. I was in Mexico. I lived in New Orleans. I lived in Denver. I was, in Europe, traveling. And back then, a really miraculous thing happened, which was that Xerox, the carbon Xerox started happening, photocopy, and I immediately took to it and started creating books. Like when very few people were doing it, I just started using the medium, and I would just fold paper and draw in it. I'd lay out a book, then I'd take it apart and put it together as a legal size piece of paper, and I'd photocopy both sides, bind them with thread, and then these would be gifts to art directors. So it's not everything I did was very much about like just generating a vibe or giving ideas. And these are examples. They're not actually that early, but they're examples of some of the things I did. I'm still doing that kind of thing. I'm still really fascinated with the idea of transmission of energy or ideas in this form. Very cheap, fast, a little bit dirty. This is not that old. This is maybe 5-6 years old. It was just a notebook that I did, and I to frame it, to encompass it, I came up with that. It was like almost like a PS. I came up with the idea of, it's a wish list. That's what it's going to be. It's just these drawings or these things are like things that are about wishing. So I just made up, a bunch of. I wrote a bunch of words, sort of in automatic writing, really fast, like too much freedom, a whole lot of loving, concrete attachments, wings, guardian angels. Immense power, premium quality thought, actions faster than thought, exuberant communication, telepathic speech, closeness, children there, borderless boundaries. So just very abstract kind of poetic thinking, and that's enough for me. And for me, that keeps it mysterious enough that it has kind of a sex appeal as a picture, and that became a book. Better hair, shining exuberance, extreme righteousness, athletic ability, health, wealth, love, aristocratic connections. Yeah, don't we all wish? And this is the kind of content. It's not. This is totally on an abstract level. But as an illustrator, this stuff informs what I do. This is where I go back to. So if I get a job that is abstract in nature, then I won't look at the books, but I'll have that in my mind. I'm going to use this. Like on the left side, there's this kind of this is sort of it's a kind of a clay that you bite into. Or you can bite into it, and you can cook it in the oven. So this is like my bite mark and a tongue, and that will be fodder for a concept. So this is very important to me. This idea of keeping the muse interested, like keeping the action going in notebooks, not just doing commercial work. It's very important to me. It always has been. It's more important to me than doing jobs. Jobs are fine, but they're kind of boring. But this is where the action is in the unfinished development of ideas. That's where I do it. I still do that. These are sort of examples of. Me actually using notebook pictures in jobs, in actual illustrations. No, the left being a notebook drawing, the right being a job for somebody who a magazine called Global Brief. So the skulls inside the skull cage are actually real. This is actually something I saw that in on a National Geographic site. This is actually something humans do, I thought, wow, that's a really powerful metaphor. So I draw it, and I collect it as food for for whatever I'm doing, whether it's a painting or whether it's an illustration. In this case, the lower left would be a notebook page, which has been employed or appropriated for a cover of maybe a cover of a children's book. And then again, used again for an illustration for a German. It's actually a magazine for the Catholic Church, believe it or not. But the idea, computers have kind of allowed me everyone has allowed everyone to appropriate and to go full force into the idea of appropriation. So I use I'm totally shameless about using stuff I've done before, like to keep the vocabulary moving. And the images on the left are these drawings that I did. Many of them, they're about this big. They're just drawing. I mean, you look at them, they look like hair, but they're not about hair. They're actually like about human energy. That's what they were. So I just did a series. I just say, okay, this stuff has a certain power. So I'll just keep doing that. So I did like 20 of these drawings. And on the left, the sixth picture on the left, those are pictures that I find that are very close to me. They are things that actually are very close to the source. And then the thing on the right is a job for a post-production company in Mexico City. So the idea for me, is to generate imagery that's very close to the source, and then prostitute it to commercial work. Pick it up and dump it in the context of more conservative media, whatever. That's always been my thing, and that's what this is. And here's another. This is the one that was actually printed for this post-production company in Mexico. So the notion is that you generate energy, you bottle up energy in personal work, and then you sell it. You sell it to a commercial work. So that's it, and and many concepts are based on the idea of, like, for instance, the radiation that of these drawings. That will be the basis for a concept. Also, it's not just a visual. It's not just a visual juicy thing. Here, these are some drawings that I did. Wing and I used to take the train across China quite a bit, and my son, who's here, also took it. And you draw on the train. And this train was a 27-hour train ride, and it was quite boring, which I quite liked. I quite liked the idea of relishing boredom. So on this train, we brought paints, and we just kind of like do poetic, kind of disembodied poetry drawings. And this is one of the ones, night sweats fueling daydreams, that kind of thing. And it's got a lot of other bullshit written there. But and here's another one done like that. They're kind of like just doing really clunky, ungraceful looking clunky characters, And then American Illustration asked me to do a year in there as a kind of a divider in the American Illustration book, and they said, whatever you want, just do 1986. So I did. So I just combined these things. I did it like really quickly in Photoshop, but and then so the writing was, I remember living in the Lower East Side. Maureen, you like this. I remember living in the Lower East Side, hot summers, conga drums in Tompkins Square Park, art galleries in every basement. George O'Keeffe died. Breakfast at Vaselka's was $1.99. I remember 7th Street at night, salsa, and screaming kids at 3 a.m. And then Wigstock, crack, and AIDS. The 4th of July, drug dealers on the block treated the kids to a truckload of M80 firecrackers dumped on the street for half a block, and then doused them with gasoline and lit them. And then the Challenger exploded. And then Halley's Comet streaked the sky. And then my son Joachim was born, and he's right here, actually. So that's to me, this kind of thing is like, there's no money in it, but it's kind of perfection in terms of art. It really wraps it all up, and it finalizes a statement. And these are things that are done many years prior to the job, quote unquote, comes in. So, yeah. So I keep going, right? So this is a thing that I've been working on for maybe 5-6 years. But it's a lot of the things I do, especially published works, they originate maybe 10-15 years before they're published. So I work very, very slowly on them. I build them as an idea very slowly. So this is a kind of it's kind of a little illustration of how I generate how I finalize a concept. It's not enough just to have a concept and do it. It has to grow mold. It has to grow a life of its own. So this is a Geriatric Kamasutra, and the basic idea is just that: geriatric meaning old age, Kamasutra meaning, the yogic practice of sexual meditation. And the drawing here would be an Indian, kind of Renaissance period drawing of people having sex in the Kama Sutra. So in this case, I just traced it and added wrinkles. I put on the wrinkle filter. But it's not enough for me. It's not enough for me to just do, like, say, okay, I'm going to do this thing, if I say, I'm going to do drawings about old people having sex, and I'll call it Geriatric Kamasutra, and I'll publish it as a book. It's not enough for me. I needed to have more hooks in me. Otherwise, I won't take it seriously. So I generate a kind of an idea that's maybe like completely unpublishable. In this case, I would just start. I actually build a book, and I start working in the book, and I turn the page, and I go, okay, now you have to have some writing. So then I just do this kind of fake writing, Steinbergian writing, And then halfway through it, I come up with the idea on the kind of middle, lower right. There's only one picture, which is what I told you about before. So I kind of like just thinking things out on paper. And then I would add a piece of vellum paper and draw on it, and do some diagrams that look like they're related to some kind of scientific bullshit, but not really, right? So it's like, but it gets across the idea of something. Scientific or pseudoscientific. So it involves me, and that's a piece of vellum in the back of it. And so the more I do, the more I get involved. The more I get involved, the better I feel it is. I'm not sure it's good. This has not been published really, except in a letterpress form. But so I'm still working on this, and this might be another 10 years if I live that long, and then that's it. So now it's not Geriatric Kamasutra as much as it is just simply relationships. So it's morphing. Right. And I still like them. I look at them, I go, like when I make a picture, I think, if I make a picture and I can look back on it like 3 years later, I had this sort of secret language, which is like, I agree with that. If I can agree with that picture, then it's okay. And that's what it is about. You do this thing, you build it up, then you look back and you go, yeah, I agree with that. Then you can continue doing it. And that's actually the good thing about getting older is you actually, for me anyway, the more I do, the more I can agree with what I'm doing. When you're young, you're always in conflict. There's insecurity and stuff like that. But the older you get, the more you kind of build kind of the fat of confidence or something. I don't know what it is. But so this I agree with this, and I'll finish it sometime. I have no idea who'd publish it. It would be a total money loser. But I actually tried to sell this to Chronicle Books, and they didn't even answer me. They're very wise. Yeah, so now it's becoming more like, okay, it's a relationship thing. It's not so much about geriatric, it's more about, humans doing that wild thing. I was told this is sexist. I think it might be. I might have to change it. And these are very old. These drawings here are very old. They precede the concept of Geriatric Kamasutra. So I have no problem pulling them back up, like kind of resuscitating them from limbo wherever they reside. And this is I just came from Detroit, and we produced a really great place called Signal Return. It's a letterpress place. I was invited to do an edition there, so I went there and we printed this. We did 4 prints based on Geriatric Kamasutra. So I see this as a kind of a step for this project, but it's not the final step. The final step is maybe it's a published book. Finally, I don't know. Or maybe not. I have no idea. So this is all letterpress. It's very beautifully done. There's a very excellent printer named I forget her name. Lee Macalonis is her name. Really excellent craftsman working on it. So this is very limited. This is 4 colors. So you take the drawing, you strip down the colors, and you apply different, I've always felt that way about publishing. Actually, I've never been that uptight about color integrity in printing. I've always seen, you make the drawing, you make the book, you write the stuff in the book, and the final product is a combination of your work and whatever the printer does. So I'm kind of happy when things screw up a bit and are not quite what I thought. So I'm right. So I started doing notebooks, and I did Xerox books, small edition books, and then eventually I was invited to do more kind of ambitious letterpress projects. The last one would be not too ambitious, but this project is quite ambitious. It's a letterpress book that was produced by a bookseller, art dealer in New York named Steve Clay. And he has a press called Granary Books, and the premise for his books is that you letterpress print part of you letterpress print something, or you print something and then you work it afterwards, and that's what this is. So it's an edition of 41, and it's a printed letterpress black, and then it's hand colored with coffee and different fruit juices and a little bit of watercolor, and like I said before, I don't know. I only do one picture. My thing is cataloging the world. That's my thing, and that's what this is. This is just one of the many kind of catalogs of the world around me. So, so this book is it was printed and it was bound, and then it was delivered to me, and then I had to paint them. And I think it's 42 of them. So I had to paint them 8 up, paint each one, and so each 8 were a little bit different from the previous 8. This project involved some really precise binding work, which was done by a guy named Daniel Kelm, who's kind of famous now because he does a very beautiful binding using metal rods in the signatures. It's very special. It's very, very special. I don't know if I can show you on the side. Yeah, if you see on the side, each signature, each fold of paper has a piece of metal, a metal rod in it. So when it opens very flat, and it's very beautiful, and it's very expensive. I think when this was done many years ago, it was almost $400 per book. And as dividers, I'm really interested in the, when I make a visual book like this, I'm also really interested in the idea of the book, the idea of page breaks, whatever. So it's like a movie. So I created this format, and I inserted latex pages into it to give you a kind of essential switch when you. So it happens 4 times in the book. And basically, it was just just simply jamming with whatever imagery was coming to me. Listening to radio, thinking about things, and drawing them, writing down words that were in the media at the time. Just to capture the moment. I mean, that's it. Basically, an encyclopedia of everything, part 1, right? Out of 9 million. The image on the right was from some kind of crazy religious text I saw somewhere, some kind of, people are always trying to diagram the world. They're always trying to figure out what the hell is going on. And I find it very interesting when people diagram them. So it's like a personal diagram of the world. So this kind of thing doesn't have much. In terms of illustration, it doesn't really work. I mean, it doesn't have that much to do with illustration per se, But in my career as an illustrator, it's really worked to my benefit to work like this, because it really has it's really brought people to me that are really interested in something beyond just doing very simple, concept drawings. I also do that. I'm not really showing that kind of thing here. I can do that. I'm not great at it. I'm more into the generating kind of an energy in drawings. So this is this letterpress book opened the way to doing a book with Chronicle Books here in San Francisco, and this is they saw the book you just saw is called Too Much Bliss. So they saw that book and they wanted to do something like that, but they wanted to have a text context, some kind of context that held it together, and I didn't really want to write it myself, so we found actually some Hindu creation myths, and we found a translation that we really liked, and we asked permission, and we used paragraphs from that to frame this book. So in it, I'm actually like paying homage to the kind of 18th century tradition of like if you see a book from the 18th century, a lot of times you'd see a preamble in the front of it that describes what the book is about, and that's what this was, kind of a preamble. It would start with a kind of a cartoon, a silent cartoon about this guy on a boat, basically, and his demise. The boat sinks eventually, but it's sort of besides the point, because basically the pictures, it's just a vehicle for printing drawings, right? One great thing we did, I think, in this book, we were very early with it. We did laser cuts, which were very, very, very intricate laser cuts, and they're done here in California. Again, we wanted to do latex like in Too Much Bliss, but it's not possible to bind it. So we figured out this other method of creating a buffer between sections. The next book I did with Chronicle was this book, which is a little bit hard to explain, but essentially what it is it's a scientific project to prove the existence of the afterlife. And the way I went about it was I made letters to people that are dead, and I wrote their address where I thought they were in the afterlife. And then I sent those letters to friends around the world to mail in the postal systems. And the idea was that if you send a letter to, for instance, this one here, Gutenberg, Johannes Gutenberg, copy room cloud 9. There's no postage, so you make your own postage, and you send it, and the only thing that's real on it is the return address. So you send it through the postal system, but if you're lucky, it gets there. It doesn't come back. So so if you send the letter and it doesn't come back, that means it's actually arrived in the afterlife, proving the existence of the afterlife. We had a really high success rate. It was almost 80%. So this one is to Jack Kevorkian, care of General Delivery, Wood of Suicide, 7th Ring Hell. Please hold for pickup. So we gave a status. This one was returned. This is for Betty. I sent it to Betty Page. And it was returned, and for good reason, because Betty Page actually was alive. Again, proving my theory that you can reach the afterlife. This one is good also. This was returned. My friend in Paris sent this, and this was returned, but she didn't believe it. She knew he was dead. She knew he was somewhere, so she readdressed it. So I don't know about Saul Steinberg, but I heard he was a womanizer. Good for him, right? So I sent it to Saul Steinberg, breaststroking in the big inkwell. And it was returned, and she readdressed it and sent it again to Saul Steinberg, the cartographer's cabinet, Palazzo dell'Arte, drawbridge of size. And it arrived. See? This is sent to a gentleman named John Holmes, who's a porn star with the largest equipment in the industry. And in the book, it was actually measured to size. So his address was length, girth divided by alcohol and drugs times betrayal and divided by money and fame. And that was delivered also. So that was like an object that went out. But I mean, the thing is, it's a very confusing concept. So I made a map to sort of clarify what actually happens to letters when they go through the mail to the other side. And this is a fold-out map. We should make it pretty clear. And then in the very end, there were stamps, so you could do your own. You could send letters to your grandma. All right, this is the last part of this little spiel. So in China, I'm not doing large paintings. These are 6 by 6 feet, about 2 by 2 meters, and these are. I've traveled a lot in my life, and this is the first time where I've actually engage myself in the culture, like doing pictures about the culture. And these are paintings that are based on Chinese ink painting, sanshui. And when you come to China, it's really quite amazing that when you see the mountains of Guilin, these places for the first time. In my book that I did about China, I commented that it was like, to me, these mountains that stick out like that, they always seem to me like inventions of artists, but they actually exist. So I started kind of thinking a lot about them, and also I really like about Chinese landscape painting, which also probably applies to Western landscape painting, is that it's very metaphorical. And so I just began drawing mountains and machinery at the same time, like a superimpose or kind of dancing with the mountains. So these mountains they're mountains and there's machines, but they're not about mountains and not about machinery. And that's pretty much what my idea now is. I'm just doing lots of paintings like this. Now I also, because I'm not really classically trained, I don't have the skill set to do a real landscape. I wish I did. So I'm actually kind of groping in the dark, and I'm working with like tempera paint, and they're painted on linen, but I stretch the linen, and then I place rice paper as a reference to the Chinese ink painting, and then I go at it and I paint. I simply work in tempera. But then I also work I'll use like high gloss varnish or high gloss paint as well, because I really like the contrast between the tempera and the gloss. So I work with materials that are not really traditional. In the lower right, you'll see this picture of a guy lying there, and that's actually that's here he is in the background. That's the kind of thing that really captures me. It's like, this is a picture of Baron von Rickendorf, which is he's the Red Baron, who was he was a flying ace in World War I. He shot down a lot of airplanes, and he was revered by both sides, by the Germans and by the British and Americans as this amazing guy. And he was shot down, apparently. He's finally shot down. He was shot down by somebody holding a gun and just pointing it and shooting him through the heart. And he landed, and they took a picture of him in his death throes. So I'm not really sure. Well, I mean, I think it's pretty plain why I like it, but it's like it's also very abstract. So this is very like that with the mountains. That says something poetic, and that's so I picked up and I used it in the pictures. Like the flower is a piece of blanket, like really cheap kind of hand-painted blanket, like very velvety. So while doing these things, I'm really interested in process. So I actually I'll include in the lower left, I'll include like the actual original sketches for the idea. So I'll throw that into the painting to inform it. And the engines are actually drawings that I've printed out on rice paper, like inkjets on rice paper, and collaged. So anything goes. These paintings ended up as again as page dividers, just like the latex pages in Too Much Bliss. So I used these paintings again for this book that I just finished, which it should have been on sale here, but it's not. But it's available now. It just came out. So this is actually this is kind of an encapsulation of my time in China for cello. These are all the pages are based on notebooks that I've kept, and they're kind of just like insights that I've gathered from being in this amazing place. This is the town of Dali from the mountain. You're looking down into the lake. It's quite small. It's a walled city. So I wanted to do a timeline of China, and it's got a very long history. It actually, the earliest cultivation of rice is 10,000 years before Christ. So it's a long time ago, right? It's 12,000 years ago, and that tigers wasn't long enough. So what I did is I just made it over 2 spreads. So this is 2 pages in the book, and you turn the page to kind of illustrate the. I really like the idea of illustration. I like the idea of explaining things with pictures. So this is very close to me. This idea of diagramming a time period. And like, for instance, in this picture, if you look in the very upper right, that space in the end of the ear, that represents the time that Mao Zedong has been in power in China. And if you go back to to here around his shoulder, that's when America was discovered. So you can kind of get a feel for the enormity of minutes spent. This is the thing about China that's very hard to understand for most people, is the burden of history that the place has. Most people in the West, they are only aware of this area, maybe like back to here. But it's almost genetic. It's in the genes, the kind of the heaviness of this, the length of this tiger. So these are done. They're drawn in notebooks. They're created as a work. This is drawn from photographs and from street signs. And I get to use my my radiator drawings, so I apply those to this project. I find in my work, I find using photographs to be really it's very refreshing. For me, I get really claustrophobic when I do too much drawing. So I really love to insert photographs. It opens it up to me. It makes me feel like I'm back in the real world. So I do that. I've always done that in my illustrations as well. Is always keeping it open as a. So these are drawn before. We have a little dog that's blind. These are drawn before we met our dog Tofu, so I feel a little bit guilt. But this is kind of a friend of mine walked me through sort of the hierarchy of edible dogs, and he told me that it's like this: yellow dogs, not purebred and must have long legs, are number 1. Like yellow dogs, kind of like golden retrievers, but they can't be golden retrievers. The second one on the most edible list is black dog. The third one is brown spotted dog. It says pedigree hounds are only eaten in a pinch because they're said to have a bad aftertaste. And then there's a short Mussolini sidekick mutts with underbites are completely off the menu because they're nasty tasting and their short legs aren't worth the effort. Anyway, so the book goes on like that. It's like observations. This is a spread from there's a kind of a flirting festival that happens near our town, and the tradition is you get together and young people get together and they do this kind of rapping to each other, spontaneously rapping, and it's very interesting. It's very beautiful. The problem is that the young people are too busy sexting each other on their cell phones that they don't come to the event. So it's all these old people doing it like this. So like this kind of thing, like photographs and drawings, to me that really it's a cat's meow. Now this is the last image. So Mao Zedong is the guy, right? He's the guy who created the last empire in China, and he has his shadow looms large, but like I'll read you this. It's Mao Zedong. To most Chinese, Mao Zedong is irrelevant, a kind of Chinese George Washington, distant and symbolic. I asked a cab driver why so many people still had statues and images of the man in their homes, and he explained that while alive, Mao killed so many people that in death he lived on as an ultra badass god to scare off lesser badass gods. He said that some people kept images of the chairman in their kitchen to chase away rats and cockroaches. This Mao, the Mao you see on the left is in our living room, and he's actually really almost, he's got lots of wax on him now. And when our Chinese friends come, inevitably they want to photograph him and post him on like their local Weibo, the local site, because they just love the symbolism of it. But I always tell them, please don't put my name on it. I have one little short film that I made, which was I traveled we traveled up to Inner Mongolia, and I made this little song. Check out the kid.